Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, I guess technically I may say already good afternoon, since it is after the few minutes after the noon. And I am Andris Spruds. I am director of Latvian Institute of International Affairs. I'm also a professor at Riga University. And of course, as always, I have a great pleasure and honor to welcome all of you in such already increasing numbers. The season is opened at our discussion today. Discussion which is devoted to security developments in the region and beyond, you may say, also globally. Also in the debate or discussion which is devoted to relations between the West and Russia. I think it is a timely debate. Is it a timely publication as well? So we have a book as well. So this is a pleasant event. So it's not just about discussion itself. We can have some thoughts after the debate itself. And it is an important as one. As I said, these questions are on our agenda almost on an everyday basis. And today we have a State of Union by Mr. Juncker describing what the European Union is faces. And I think we are facing quite a number of challenges. The Euro-Atlantic community is facing quite a many defining moments. It's not just about one defining moment. We've seen refugee crisis. We unfortunately, I think for many of us, we experienced Brexit. We will have forthcoming elections next year in France and in Germany. I think not less interesting than those elections in the United States. And the announcements during the election campaign in the United States, I think they have created some concerns about also the like-minded community of NATO, like-minded community of the EU, of course, after Brexit. In all of this, neighborhood remains indispensable. Our proximity remains indispensable and important. We can speak more of ring of fire, as Carl Bildt said, rather than ring of friends. In the east, we've seen annexation of Crimea, and war in Donbass, unfortunately, is not yet sort of completely finished, and we see bloodshed almost on an everyday basis. And it has been certainly the game changer for all of us. Situation in Ukraine remains fragile. Our relations with Russia remain also quite precarious. And fundamental issues are on the agenda. What we can say about security architecture, or I think to be more precise, about security landscapes in Europe. What happens beyond as well European security landscapes? What is Russia's role? And Russia is experiencing or having its own elections this weekend, and let's see how it goes. And of course, it's even more interesting elections will be in 2018. What happens in our relations between the EU and Russia? What are the sanction regime? When finally we might speak about some post-sanction environment? And as one of the authors in the book, Ian Kearns, he is saying, we are risking now, or we are facing the risk of unmanaged confrontation, unfortunately. So this unmanaged confrontation must be certainly discussed. There is some silver lining. The Baltic region appears to remain stable and safe, as reassurance and solidarity has played also its role. NATO Warsaw Summit, I think, has been also the game changer in positive terms for us, in terms of perception and concrete steps. We will have even German boots on the ground. It's our discussion with Werner from time to time. And I think this is a stabilizing factor, an important factor. But of course, the questions still remain on the wider security issues and what's further and also what our relations with Russia. We are grateful to our distinguished speakers and participants, also the authors of the book. We are grateful that they are joining us today. And it's just not about today. We have established a wider process of Riga Dialogue. So the Riga Dialogue is already, in a sense, a brand. So it reflects our belief that despite all the difficulties, we need still to debate. We still need to engage in a dialogue. We still need to look at least for opportunities of the dialogue. Riga has been always a hub of intellectual debate. So those regular spring and autumn meetings and discussions, I think they are very instrumental to bring the stakeholders around the table and to have the topics of importance on the agenda. But of course, last but not least, I always add, and it's important, dialogue cannot be possible without the stakeholders, without those who are involved in the debate and the dialogue, and without the partners. Internationally, we've been having a good cooperation, very productive cooperation with Nuclear Threat Initiative, with European Leadership Network, and also with German Marshall Fund. So we are grateful to our partners. But last but not least, in Latvia and also regionally, I would like to strongly thank the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung for the vision and support. I think the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung has been very instrumental for us as an institute, and I like to repeat, and it's for me a pleasure to repeat, that our success has been very strongly promoted by our good partners, and Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung is absolutely on the top on the list. And it's not just about our cooperation. I think we can appreciate Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung for promoting the enriching debate on difficult matters. And this is also because of the leadership, and here is Werner Rechmann, who has been a director of Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. We had the pleasure of disagree on many issues, but at the same time we have agreed on the importance of enriched and thorough debate. Werner, please, the floor is yours. So I wish to all of us a successful event today, and successful and rich and dynamic debate. But with this, please, Werner, the floor is yours.
First of all, Andris, thanks very much for your introduction and also for your words concerning the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation. Most of you know what the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation is all about. It's a political German foundation related to the Social Democratic Party, but we are independent. And I will not go into the topic of today, because there we have experts among us who are much better informed and have much more knowledge than myself, and we will have the debate later with our panelists. So, but I would like to welcome also the Member of Parliament from the Latvian Parliament, and also the Excellencies. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. And yesterday, and then I would like to mention, there was this debate or a forum with the three ministers of foreign affairs from the Baltic states and Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the German Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I think what was very important, that within the EU, and Frank-Walter Steinmeier is really doing it, it is so important, never forget the small countries, because that is essential for the whole work within the European Union, and therefore that he came over and had a debate in the morning among each other, also to prepare their meeting in Bratislava, I think end of this week. I think it was very important, and also the debate indicated there are slightly differences towards military presence, but all of them have a common ground to work on a reform of the European Union, but not to change it with new legal frameworks. So it was a very fruitful and open discussion. And today, to debate about here the publication, Riga Dialogue, the Afterthoughts, I would like to announce also here that we will continue the work in next year, because I will leave Latvia by the end of this year, because I'm retiring. After 37 years working within the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation on different international posts, now it's time also to look after my family, because otherwise they are complaining he's too often away. But we will work together, and finally I would really like to thank Andris Spruds and the whole team of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. It was and it will continue to be a pleasure to work together, although, as he mentioned, boots on the ground and small other issues, we were debating it. Andris, thanks very much, and your whole team, and really a pleasure that I could be part of this process. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for kind words, and I can just say you will be certainly missed, but certainly we will continue our cooperation. So and absolutely, it's been a mutual pleasure. But it's been also the mutual pleasure to cooperate with Saeima and with our legislators, and I would say especially with Ojārs Kalniņš, who has been a very good and productive and an efficient partner for us in many ways, especially enriching the debate, participating in our debates, and showing describing and outlining also the Latvian priorities. And of course, we are very happy to have you with us today as well, and to enlighten us on a recent developments. Yesterday, Steinmeier's visit, as Werner mentioned. Joe Biden was coming here a few days ago. Today is the State of Union address. So where Latvia is in all of this? And of course, Ojārs Kalniņš is the Foreign Affairs Committee chairman of Latvia's Saeima. So you are very well placed to enlighten us on these issues as well. Please, Ojārs, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Andris, and thank you, Werner. And I want to congratulate the Latvian Institute of International Affairs for another great program and for always including the Saeima amongst other experts and NGOs. Now, I happen to really like the title of this presentation because I love metaphors, and I think this one gives us a lot to work with. As we know, Ronald Reagan once famously demanded that we tear down the most famous wall of the Cold War. But today, at least in the US presidential elections and in some countries in Europe, walls have become fashionable again. It occurred to me that China, which is is the creator of the largest and the most famous wall in the world, today is building bridges. Not only do they have the longest bridge in the world, but they have 14 of the 20 longest bridges in the world, but they're also building bridges to the west. And one example of that is the one road, one belt concept, where they're trying to expand economic and other ties with Europe and the West. Russia, one of the topics we're discussing here, is also building walls and fences, most notably in parts of occupied Georgia, the South Ossetia. But we also know they're building bridges. One they're attempting to build to illegally annexed Crimea. But conceptually, Russia is also trying to bridge some gaps through the whole concept of information warfare. And today, Russia Today, Sputnik, RussiaDirect.com, and other media outlets are trying to cross the borders of credibility to influence the hearts and minds of people here in the West about their policies. But the point about a bridge is that it has to be a two-way street. And as we know, both NATO and the European Union have been trying to keep the channels of communication open with Russia. Whoa. Okay. We will do with that. Not tearing down bridges, but some of the furniture. So for NATO and EU, it's very important to maintain channels of communication with Russia on a number of issues. 2 weeks ago, I was in Bratislava for the Interparliamentary Conference of the Slovakian presidency, and as usual, we had a debate over a concluding document. And one of the debates, particularly in reference to Russia, was whether we talk about pursuing a dialogue with Russia or selective engagement. And as usually happens at these events, we found a compromise which more or less amounted to pursuing dialogue through selective engagement where necessary or where useful. But as I said, dialogue requires movement in both directions, and I think this is the challenge that we face with Russia. If we talk to each other, but we don't listen, then dialogue becomes an illusion, and essentially there is a wall between us that we don't always recognize. I was in China a month ago with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and this was the first time in 5 years that China had welcomed the delegation from the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. We had a week of very frank, open discussions. We talked about many things. Yes, we disagreed about many subjects, but it was a valuable exchange. And the key thing was that it showed that China was willing to discuss these issues, even on a NATO level. But I think in this debate over walls and bridges, I think, as I said, the EU and NATO positions are very clear. We seek dialogue to resolve conflicts. Whether the dialogue over Syria, the agreements that have been reached recently will be productive or not, that remains to be seen, but at least that is a positive development. But apart from Syria, as we could see in Crimea, in the Donbass, or even in Georgia, any kind of dialogue that we can talk about is still a one-way street. So really, it's up to Russia to decide whether it is ready to open up a bridge of communication that goes in both directions, that is truly a two-way dialogue. So basically, I just want to end this brief opening discussion by going back to Ronald Reagan. I think he again once famously said about treaties that you can trust, but you must verify. And I'd say the same thing about dialogue. Yes, we want to pursue dialogue. I think Latvia believes in dialogue. We continue to have one on various levels with Russia. We support dialogue on the EU and NATO level. But a dialogue has to go in both directions. It has to be a real communication and exchange of ideas, not just people talking at or past each other. So I'm just going to end my comments now. I'm not going to go into detail about some of these other issues, although I'd be happy to talk about that later if there's an opportunity. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Okay, so I think I switched the places, and we can start a discussion. And of course, once more, thanks to Werner, thanks to Ojārs for your insights and already providing some ideas of where we should look. Last year, actually, we had of course, similar discussion, just with a little bit different subtitle on the Western-Russian relations, and then we had a subtitle, Engagement or Mistrust. And we came to conclusions that perhaps it would be a good idea to have engagement despite mistrust. This year we have harsher analogies of bridges and walls. And even though, as Mark Twain said, that good neighbors are being made by high fences and high walls, of course, this is not where we immediately directly look at. So we were tempted still to use analogy of bridges and to include it. But as also in our discussion in spring, we were reminded by one of the Russian colleagues that actually Brezhnev talked once with Richard Nixon on building bridges. And Richard Nixon offered to build the bridges between Soviet Union and the United States. And Brezhnev asked in a simple terms, should we build the bridge along the river or across the river? So basically, we can build the bridges in different way as well. So anyhow, this dichotomy in our relations remain. And the question is how to proceed. What would be the next steps? What would be the next steps to make a dialogue and to make the bridge, which is not just across or two bridges across the river, or along the river, but actually across the river. And today we have an excellent panel of speakers. And I will introduce them in a due course of our discussion. I will kindly ask each of our distinguished speakers to speak no more for 7 minutes so that we can have a productive debate as well. And we start with Reinhard Krumm, who is director of the Regional Project on Cooperation and Security in Europe. Has been also the long-standing partner of ours, and we already crossed our roads in Moscow at some point when I was still allowed in Moscow. And of course, you've been also in Tashkent, so you know quite an environment of post-Soviet space. And also in this book, you had you assembled a good group of authors which debate the scenarios. You have several scenarios. And where I would start with, you also come to conclusions that basically, of course, we should aspire for common home between Russia, the Eastern partners, and the European Union members. But at the moment, somehow we are more at shared home, but the shared home rather looks like the big block of Soviet kind of apartments and flats. It's not really the newly fresh and nice and dynamic. So the question is why we are still living in quite a shattered place, quite in a Soviet or post-Soviet environment. What are the reasons? As in Latvia would ask whom to blame for, let us say, not that everything has gone smooth in our relations. Reinhard, it's a pleasure to have you, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, Andris. Thank you very much for the foundation. Yeah. Is that working? Hello?
Not yet.
Not yet, it will come? Yeah. Now, sorry. Also, I was here last year and I enjoyed the discussion very much, and I'm repeating what I said last time because I think today we have a new group. I lived in Riga from 94 to 96. Elizabeth is Yella 18 across the street. And I met my wife here. But she is American, not Latvian. So Latvia, the Baltic countries in my work, and I'm dealing with Eastern Europe for the last 25 years, has always had a special place. Mr. Rechmann said that we have small countries, you have big countries. During the Cold War, Germany always felt like a small country, and we kind of still do. So working here and coming here and discussing the issue with you is quite a pleasure. Yes, in the booklet we were showing a scenario project, which I kind of presented last time. So my idea was to go a little bit further today, if you don't mind. During the discussion, I'm happy to come back to the scenarios. I would like to divide my short presentation into the status quo, just so we're all on the same page, the interests of the different involved parties, some ideas of further cooperation, and the instruments, which are quite important, I think. So where are we? The status quo, so to speak. We have a serious geopolitical conflict in Eastern Europe. We couldn't believe that this would happen. The 90s were so positive, also in the Baltic countries, but also in Germany after the unification. And now we have this. We thought geopolitics are completely gone, but we have this conflict in Eastern Europe. And if I say Eastern Europe, we're talking about bridges and the West. Well, Eastern Europe, for me, are the countries of the Eastern Partnership plus Russia. So we're talking about this region. We also have a real conflict of interests towards Eastern Europe, or the countries of the Eastern Partnership, which we hadn't had for a long time, and I will come back to that. And the most threatening thing is that war in Europe is again possible. Usually it's said we never had it before. I remember quite frankly that we had it in 1999 in Yugoslavia, so this is not the first time. But for us in Eastern Europe to have a military conflict is threatening to us. So the security in Europe in general is unclear. We have a system or an idea of multipolarity, which is mainly supported by Russia, against the idea of multilateralism, which is different. Multilateralism, basically, if you're small or big, you have the same approach, you have the same interest, and you have the same representation. If you have multipolarity, then you have big power centers who are kind of talk to each other. Last year, we had 200 years of the Vienna Congress. This is what multipolarism is about. It's not multilateralism. So we have different approaches now, which is also difficult. We have kind of, and I'm sure we can discuss that too, an integration competition, the Eurasian Economic Union and the EU. And finally, the Ukraine is only the symptom. It's not the cause of the problem. If we look at the interests, the EU is very much, as I already have said, into multilateralism. This is our idea. This goes for the EU in general. rules and not just pure power. So we're looking for rules, and the rules have been broken. At the same time, this is not interest, but this is the understanding of the EU, both approaches, having an Eastern Partnership and a partnership for modernization with Russia is not working out. And the problem is what to do about it. I'll come back later to that too. The United States is also part of it, even though for the last couple of years the United States and Washington did not really interfere. Minsk II was negotiated without the United States, but still, they're there, clearly. And the United States have made clear, the administration, the Obama administration, that the Ukraine is not a core interest of the United States. The United States is not going to war because of the Ukraine, and this goes for all the countries of the Eastern Partnership, but Russia has to pay a price what they have done in Ukraine. The interests of the countries of the Eastern Partnership is divided completely. A couple of years ago, it seemed to be this is one region, one interest, this is over. They're all looking for independence. They are independent, and they would like to keep this independence, being free in their movement, in their decisions, but three are orientated towards EU, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine. One is entirely looking towards the Eurasian Economic Union, which is Belarus. Then you have Armenia, which is also part of that union, but also looking for a new agreement with the EU. And finally, Azerbaijan, which is undecided. The fourth player clearly is Russia, and this is the difficult part, and I'm sure this is the core of the negotiation, or not negotiation, but the discussion today. Russia doesn't want any Western orientation, integration at the moment. It doesn't want no strategic partnership. It wants to be its own power polar. This is multipolarism, not just the United States, but we have China and then Russia itself. And this is something entirely different what the approach of the EU is. If we look to the future, my third short point, I only have 7 minutes, as everybody else, bridges or walls, it is again not only Russia, it's also Eastern Europe. So the idea of the EU talking, because we're here at Latvia and I'm from Germany, security in Europe, a general understanding of security which goes for everybody, also Russia, because Russia is part of Europe, but it's also the EU, clearly. Avoid dividing lines, and I'm afraid we have a huge dividing line. We need, and this is just a phrase one can fill with many activities, islands of cooperation. You said something about dialogue. I'll also come back to that. But islands of cooperation, which then might, this is an old concept of development work, end up with a bigger piece of land. And all this on the basis of rules. This is the Finding Act, the final act of Helsinki. This is the Paris Charter. And this is a common understanding we have in the EU. And what are the instruments? You were mentioning Ronald Reagan tearing down the wall. You could also argue that Ronald Reagan was a guy who supported diplomacy and dialogue. He understood that with Mr. Gorbachev, he can have a dialogue, and that's what he did. And that was very successful, but it was dialogue. So far we have the EU and NATO, but we haven't introduced yet the OSCE yet. Germany has the chairmanship at the moment. Next year it will be Austria. And the OSCE could be an instrument in any way to go further in achieving something. I agree and understand the OSCE chairmanship of Germany is coming to an end. It has been extremely difficult. And it also has been extremely difficult because of Russia. Very little is coming back. But to say that only Russia should come forward now, I think is not good enough. I think it's both sides. Because again, the Ukraine is only the symptom, it's not the cause. And I think we're coming back to the cause during the discussion, and I have 1 minute left. Diplomacy is something which the German Foreign Minister Steinmeier is promoting. Last Friday he had a speech, a presentation on that. He was complaining to himself, diplomacy takes a while. It's not the fast result. And I think everybody else in the room understands the crisis we have will take many years, if not decades. So diplomacy is difficult. And I would even argue, and this is my last point, we need a diplomacy to start diplomacy. We talk a lot, but we have very little to offer, both sides. So we need something up front to make sure that we really can start a discussion on what we want. Thank you very much.
Reinhard, many thanks, I think, for the thought-provoking, I would say, presentation and showing the mood of current situation. I think the mood is a bit precarious, to mildly said. I am also reminded by your words the expression of Robert Kaplan. I repeat it from time to time, that we now in Europe, especially in Central and East Europe, we came to the end of post-historical nirvana. We saw that we live in this post-historical nirvana, that there is no wars possible, that there are no geopolitics anymore, that there are no great power ambitions, that we can have multilateral frameworks. That's ended. The war is possible, as you said. So I think this is quite a new awakening. But I would ask, of course, Mr. Steinmeier. I think he has expressed quite a number of ideas, and also here in Riga, and he's been very active, and I think he's been very active on both fronts, be it in trying to speak with Russia, but also he's been very active reassuring the Baltic countries, and we certainly appreciate it. But of course, among some of those ideas, a few months ago, he expressed the idea, not even a few months ago, it was a few weeks ago, that there is a potential for new arms control deal. How you would say it? Is it the right time for discussing a new arms deal with Russia? Please.
I think the idea, the Ebert-Stiftung, as you know, is a political foundation which is close to the Social Democratic Party, but it's not a social democratic think tank. So what I'm saying here is nothing official. It's just the own thoughts as an expert. I think the German presidency of the OSCE has been extremely difficult. There were a lot of expectations. I think Germany from the very beginning were trying to manage expectation, but still they were there. And I guess you know, having the chairmanship of the OSCE is not a dream job. Germany wanted to do it because they thought it's time, but it is very difficult. So I think the idea of Minister Steinmeier to start discussing arms reduction talks is an attempt to find something which Russia is interested in. Russia is always saying we would like to reduce weapons. They have signed a treaty. The Russian Duma even has signed it, the CFE, I think it's called, and other countries have not done that because this treaty, amassing weapons on the border, has also something to do with reducing Russian armed forces or just getting rid of them at all in Moldova, in the Transnistria region, and also in Georgia. Russia hasn't done that. That's the reason why Western countries have not signed this treaty. But if Russia is discussing or proposing for the last couple of years, not officially, but in talks, let's talk about reduction of weapons, then I think Mr. Steinmeier's idea was, okay, you want it, you'll get it. Let's see what comes out of it. And you will remember that the reset of Mr. Obama has concluded with another START agreement. And very quickly and very efficiently. So this is the idea to have something so the OSCE chairmanship of Germany is able to achieve something, and also looking for the next chairmanship of Austria so they can continue on this topic. I think this is the idea.
Okay, thank you, Reinhard. I can just add that in the Baltic countries, you mentioned the Conventional Forces in Europe treaties. In the Baltic countries, the perception is actually that Russia has withdrawn from the treaty, and basically that has been sort of nulled by Russian side. And following your idea that Russia actually doesn't want strategic partnership, and here I'm very happy to bring the Russian colleague in the discussion, Dr. Ekaterina Chimiris, who is a program manager and also one of our good counterparts, Russian International Affairs Council, who is led by the former minister Mr. Igor Ivanov. And Ekaterina, I understand that you might have a difficult task here to throw the ball back and to defend also Russia's position, but I think you don't have to defend, but to explain us, I think it is also important. So, but as you see, there are some critical words with regard to Russia's willingness also to cooperate and to engage some kind of strategic partnership. And of course, Ukraine has been for all of us, at least for the Baltic countries, quite an invocation of the ghosts of the past. Ekaterina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here on behalf of Russian International Affairs Council. Our think tank is now 5 years old, and I'm here because my colleagues asked me to look at the current discourse on the problem issues from Russian side, NATO side, and the European Union. And I guess that conflict arguments are well known here. That's why I will point out the issues that have a potential for dialogue. First of all, if we look at the official discourse, at the public discourse, Russia as well as Western partners blame each other for breaking of the principles of European and Euro-Atlantic security. They blame each other of not ready for dialogue, for diplomacy, and so on and so forth. But I think that despite we use the same concept, it is a question: do we understand this concept the same? If we take another metaphor, not a bridge, not a wall, but playing chess. If we play chess, we use the same figures, but do we use the same rules? And I think for the expert community, it's high time to look at this concept, to understand, do the politicians, do the officials understand these concepts the same? And I think it is a huge task for us for the nearest future. The second point I would like to speak about is, of course, the Ukrainian conflict. And here I would like to draw your attention to the fact that if we would like to start a dialogue, we need trust. Trust now is destroyed. It is very hard to rebuild trust, but it is possible. And if we need to build some trust, we need some successful cooperation. And I guess that dealing with the Ukrainian conflict can become such successful cooperation. I don't mean that Russia or European Union need to tell the Ukrainian elites what to do. But I think that it is very important to look at the situation, to investigate what is going on with the legitimacy of current Ukrainian elites. I guess that this legitimacy is not very strong now. What is going on with the economic situation? And what is going on with the social and economic situation in the Donbas region? It's a new, very big gray zone near our borders, and nobody exactly knows what's going on there, unless we go there and make some observations. And speaking about Ukraine, I think that strategically, this country is behaving itself, I think, a little bit strange, because I also look at the situation in Serbia. How does Serbia behave itself with the Russian side and European side? And I think that Serbian strategy is much more wise, because Serbian government tried to benefit from cooperation with both sides, and moreover, it posed itself as a bridge. We are speaking about bridges today. I think that such countries as Ukraine, as Baltic states, can become such bridges in cooperation with of Russia and Europe and Western partners. And the last point that I would like to tell about now is that Russia and Western partners both think that Cold War is a concept of a previous historical period, and I think that it is a very good sign that we are not going to build new walls resembling the Cold War period. Well, and finally, I also would like you to think about one interesting thing. Well, mostly the most popular paradigm of thinking now is dualistic. What it means? It means that we have our point of view and another point of view which is absolutely wrong. But dualistic way of thinking is not the only way of thinking in our humanity. We also have a plural understanding of the situation. What does it mean? It means that we try to look at the situation from the side of our counterpart, to understand what does our counterpart, how does our counterpart looks at the situation, what is its motivation. And I think that it can be done at least on the expert level. And if we will, I think we will have huge opportunities for mutual understanding and for mutual investigation. I think that I can finish now. Thank you very much, and I'm open to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ekaterina, for repeating once more the wish also for building bridges and mutual understanding. In this case, I again fulfill my duty of moderator and trying from time to time a little bit provoke. I hope that also Russia understands why the Baltic countries have been so much keen to have NATO deployment in the Baltic countries, and it would not undermine our cooperation with Russia. How will you look at this?
Well, for me, I'm from an expert community. For me, this situation with NATO is also about trust, because now we have a game of some actions. NATO makes some actions, and Russian side makes some actions without a dialogue. It's a dialogue without words. But I think if we start a dialogue with conversations, these actions of putting the weapons can not stop, but be postponed for perhaps the future.
So you don't mind the Baltic countries having the... It's a rhetorical question. Let's proceed. We can come back to this in a continuation of our discussion. The next one is our also good colleague, Bruno Lété, the Transatlantic Fellow on Security and Defense from German Marshall Fund's office in Brussels. Bruno, I read your article with also a big interest, and of course you mostly focused on NATO. And I was immediately reminded, reading your paper, about actually Biden's speech. Biden was here a few weeks ago, and he said that fifth article is holy and sacred. And then I read in your article that history shows that there is nothing sacred about the durability of an alliance, and NATO is not an exception. Are we in some transformative crossroads, actually, that we should not look at NATO-Russia relations, but in some kind of wider changes and transformation in security architecture in Europe? Bruno, the floor is yours. But of course, you can give also your insights, what you already prepared.
Well, personally, I do hope that NATO will be the exception, but you know, there are tendencies to take into account for that. But I will get back to these points that you made. I just want to say thank you first for hosting me. The German Marshall Fund has quite a tradition to working here in Latvia and in the region. And you know, me personally, my first boss at GMF used to be Ronald Asmus, who transferred his passion and his love for this region to me. So personally, it's also quite nice to be here for me personally. First, perhaps, before I turn to our big neighbor, Russia, I want to take a look at ourselves. because I do believe that 2017, next year, will be a very interesting year for our own foreign and security policy. You already referred briefly to it in your introduction, but first, and not the least, we do have a US election coming up. This campaign has been characterized by two fundamental different candidates with a very different view on the world. And so whoever wins the race in November, there's no doubt that it will have an influence on the future of Europe's security and even for the world as a whole. So that's one. Two, next year, NATO will once again organize a summit, a mini summit. It's principally also to welcome the new US president. It will be also a chance to inaugurate the new headquarters in Brussels. But NATO is also widely expected to announce its intention next year to review its strategic concept. The current one dates back from 2010, which was during the peak of NATO's engagement in Afghanistan. These documents usually get refreshed every 10 years. So next year it will be a good chance to actually start thinking about NATO's vision for the next decade to come. So that's two. And the third thing, which I think will be interesting, why 2017 will be interesting, is there's so many things happening right now within the European Union. We have High Representative Mogherini, who will launch our global strategy at the end of the year. Brexit has renewed hopes for all dreams of a European Defence Union. Individual member states are actually also re-evaluating the usefulness of bilateral security arrangements. Think about the Weimar Triangle. And of course, we have the French elections and the German elections. So I think all those dynamics together will really present opportunities next year for our own foreign policy, our own security policy, opportunities for making decisions, for elaborating perhaps a new strategy, a new vision for the years to come. And turning back to our topic, obviously those dynamics will also impact Western-Russian relations. A relation, I believe, that needs to be increasingly seen through the prism of confrontation on the one hand, especially in this corner of Europe, down the eastern flank to the Black Sea, but on the other hand also a difficult but increasing sense of cooperation in other domains. Think about Syria, think about Iran, think about North Korea, think even about the fight against terrorism. So just looking at the reality of things, in my eyes, I think we have de facto entered a transactional relationship with Russia, where we have confrontation on the one hand, but difficult cooperation on the other. So perhaps we should not be talking about bridges and walls, but rather about a labyrinth. I don't know. And what is the way out of this labyrinth? Probably the only solution is to have some sort of common understanding between Washington, Brussels, and Moscow on what the future architecture or security architecture of Europe should look like. But given the current stalemates in Ukraine and in Syria, I don't think such scenario is very much likely in a near future. So what can we talk about then with Russia, especially given the challenges in this region? To be frank, I don't think that much. But the most realistic avenue of discussion, in my eyes, is risk reduction, military risk reduction. We've already mentioned it before. I don't have to tell this room about the frequent provocations performed by Russian jet fighters. We had yet another incident last week when a Russian MiG was simulating an attack on a US naval ship in the Black Sea region. So the current military trends are worrying. And we need to talk to Russia, either to enforce the current rules of the game or to come up with new ones, either or. I'm saying this because, I also do think that we often engage with Russia. We see our security guarantees with Russia based on rules of the games that were established in the 90s. And these arrangements back from the 90s may perhaps not necessarily cover the needs of today. I'm talking about the NATO-Russia Founding Acts. I'm talking about the CFE Treaty, the Budapest Memorandum, the INF Treaty. I mean, these were wonderful documents to regulate the rise of a post-Cold War order back in the 90s. But I think we also need to wake up to the reality that perhaps we are no longer living in a post-Cold War order. We already entered a new phase, a new world order. And perhaps therefore, I think, we need to think about different concepts. It is a fact, it is a reality that Russia no longer wants to play according to the rules that we set up in the 90s. So we have two choices. Either we remain stubborn and we abide by those rules, although we know very well that they don't work, that they don't work very well. I think that's also what Ian Kearns referred to in his unmanageable risk scenario. Or we think about new concepts, about something new. In my eyes, a Europe whole and free can only be guaranteed if Russia is on board. It is a neighbor, it is a geographical reality that we cannot change. So we need to think of something, new concepts, or adapt existing ones. Now, just to finish, since we've talked so much about old US presidents, if you look at modern history, we regulated our relationships with Russia according to two concepts. There was Harmel, there was Reagan. Harmel said you need strong engagement, strong deterrence, and I think this is what we are trying to do right now today. Doesn't seem to work very well in my eyes. So perhaps, in my opinion, we need a little bit more of Reagan, which said you need to negotiate from a position of strength. So perhaps first we need to work on our own strengths and develop our deterrence, and then we can negotiate. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno, for already putting NATO into the picture. And of course, this is still one of the instruments, one of the channels, one of the organizations we believe in that is still a player and a stakeholder also in relations with Russia. But you touched, I think, upon a very interesting subject on those agreements. And especially if we speak about some concrete steps, I may ask you, so what to do with the NATO-Russia Founding Act? Because you say that it's not responding to the present-day realities. It actually is back from the 1990s. But if you scratch the Russia Founding Act, actually you remain with nothing, because at least then you have some kind of dialogue and some kind of meeting, at least on ambassadorial level. At least there are still some formats of risk management and risk reduction. So would you see that we should proceed with scratching the old ones, or before we try to create a new ones? Of course, we can think about the concepts, but what would be the concrete steps?
No, I mean, scratching is never been the intention, I think, but we need to adapt. We need to consider the current realities, the current threats. And I do believe that what we have in place today no longer totally responds to the needs. Think even about, it was mentioned before, the threats in the hybrid domain, the cyber domain, the digital domain. There's not only conventional threats, it's a new environment. And so we need to think about all those things to manage our relationship. So don't scratch what we have, but start thinking about adaptation or something new. And I think if you look at NATO, that is exactly what NATO is doing nowadays. It is adapting. It was a process that started in Wales, has been continued in Warsaw, and if we think in Brussels a new strategic concept will be announced, it will be a process that continues, and that's really what it is about, continued adaptation. And I think we failed to adapt these treaties since the 90s, so we need to think about that.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. And we may proceed. The last but not least, Imants Lieģis, Latvian ambassador to France. But of course, you had a number of positions in the past, the former Minister of Defense, the former European Affairs Committee Chair in Latvia's Parliament, and of course you are also the member of the European Leadership Network, and I would say that you are one of the founding fathers of the Riga Dialogue. So you've been contributing for this dialogue already for some years, and we absolutely appreciate it highly. Imants, you bring, I guess, more Latvia into the picture, and of course you can have a wider views, but where is this Latvia's place in all of this? And I might ask something similar to what I asked you last year, how to balance this feeling of insecurity with the dialogue, how to combine. Imants, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Andris, and thanks for inviting me to participate once again this year. And it's always a pleasure to be here. And as you mentioned, my entree, as we now speak in Paris, my entree into these dialogues is through the European Leadership Network, and I'm very privileged to have worked with a lot of good colleagues, and also in partnership with the council, which the Russian International Affairs Council, which Ekaterina represents today. Latvia's position, or Latvia's contribution, I mean, I think that I'd like to take up what Bruno rounded off with, because he said more Regan, but I would say more Riga, and more Riga dialogue. I think it has been successful. It makes an important contribution, and if we remind ourselves of the context of the Riga dialogue, it is very much a bridge-building exercise. But I think it's one that doesn't have any illusions. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see specific results after each, apart from these very nice publications that we're presenting today. But in the grander scheme of things, we don't necessarily aim for any other specific results. But at the same time, and here something I mentioned in my contribution to the book, I think I would agree with the assertion that dialogue is not a policy. And this was something that came up during last year's Riga Dialogue. There was a bit of an interesting interaction between some of the participants, and dialogue is not a policy is really the key words that come out of Estonia, which is what we've tended to notice. And I would agree, but at the same time, I think it is important to maintain dialogue, even if we're not saying that it's a policy per se. We in Latvia, I don't think that it's in our nature to construct new walls or curtains. I mean, we spent half a century behind a curtain, and I was noted recently that the current Chancellor of Germany spent a lot of her life behind a wall. So it is important to build these bridges, and I think our dialogue is an attempt to do so. I want to just mention 3 points that I've taken out of the book, the Afterthoughts book, to show the value of continuing dialogue. The first of these is that a combination of deterrence and engagement is, and here I'm quoting Ian Kearns, is inescapable to traverse the delusional frontier. Well, I mean, I agree, with Ian, but it's right that it's important to uphold this combination of deterrence and engagement, and I don't think there's any contradiction between the two. And I think we were reminded of this yesterday if we look at the press conference between Steinmeier and Edgars Rinkēvičs, our foreign minister, where they essentially confirmed that it is important to have a dialogue, bearing in mind that we have reached now a stage of deterrence within the alliance, which I think we're very comfortable with. And it was always the approach of Latvia, I think, to first of all ensure or to work in parallel with both engagement, but at the same time, because of this sense of vulnerability in the region as a result of Russia's annexation of Crimea, that there was more of an emphasis on the deterrence element, but we're also very supportive of engagement and dialogue, or however we wish to describe it. Obviously, the decisions of Warsaw vis-à-vis deterrence were very welcome. We have the decision on the forward deployment in the eastern flank, boots on the ground from Germany, UK, and here Canada, with a lot of other contributing countries from NATO, which is very important. So we have the solidarity of NATO countries throughout the alliance. I mean, since arriving in Paris earlier this year, one of the first things that I raised with the French was, will they be prepared to contribute to this this forward presence. And as we know, despite France being one of the two main European military powers, because of the internal challenges that they face, they have felt able to contribute only in a smaller way without taking on a lead or framework nation role. So I just want to quote also what the Warsaw Summit communiqué said about this issue of the combination. It said that meaningful dialogue with a Russia willing to engage on the basis of reciprocity. And I think this is also an important statement by the heads of state and government of the Allies. Second point, and again I'm referring to Ian Kearns's delusions, I would say that the second point is that dialogue illustrates that delusions continue to sprout, and here I'm using a Latvian term, kā sēnes pēc lietus. Delusions continue to sprout like mushrooms after rainfall. And what do I mean by that? Ian refers on the one hand to various Russian delusions on the part of Russia, and he also points out that there are various delusions on the part of West, including within Eastern Europe. But in my contribution to the book, I also point to some further, what I would describe as delusions, which I think came out of our dialogue earlier this year in Riga. The first of these was that the contention made by our Russian participants in the dialogue was that NATO is preparing to attack Russia. And this is, this has continued to appear presumably for internal consumption within Russia even since we had that dialogue. And the second, what I would describe as delusional point that was made, that came out during the last Riga dialogue, was, and this is something that relates to Latvia internally, it was the contention that there is a need to immediately resolve questions of Latvia's permanent residents who opt out of Latvian citizenship. So this question of dialogue and delusions was my second point. My final point, as I've only got 1 minute left, is that I would say that dialogue is a useful vehicle for asserting facts. Bruno mentioned the fact that there are different concepts that we're now facing, and one of these different concepts, and the reason why we have to focus on facts, is that as the current edition of The Economist pointed out, we're now living in a post-truth society, where some politicians tend towards fantasy, and as a result of that, facts get sort of swept under the carpet. We've seen populists, I think there's illustrations of this both in the outcome of the Brexit referendum with what people like Farage had said during the campaign. We're seeing this to a certain extent with the Republican candidate in the US elections, Mr. Trump, and there is as a result of this, that we see there's some wild allegations that are made which aren't based on facts, but these allegations then go viral because of the new media environment in which we live, and there's the manipulation of those tools by all sorts of methods. So, in closing, Andris, I would say that transparency, openness, honesty should continue to prevail to encourage our dialogue in Riga, and so that it becomes a dialogue of the listening rather than a dialogue of the deaf. Thank you.
Yes, so Riga Dialogue must be continued. It reminds me also one of the, comparisons of two schools. There is a Yalta school and Riga school, of course. In that Riga school, it's more about a quite assertive position, and first of all, thinking about how to constrain some other countries or partners. But Imants, thank you so much. But I'm still tempted, as you know, and we have this little bit debate, and I know that you have your diplomatic position, but still I'm tempted by your reference to Ian Kearns, who I think wrote a very interesting also article. Of course, you wrote an interesting article, but he wrote exactly about those delusions on both sides. And you referred to some of them, but he spoke about delusions on the Western side as well. In the West, there is the illusion, especially in some parts of Eastern Europe, that we don't need Russia. Would you say that this delusion exists in Latvia?
No, and thank you for the question.
That's good. It's short, so we can proceed immediately to Q&A part. So, please, questions from the audience. There certainly must be someone. Veiko, you are always on the line. Please.
Here in Latvia, and actually referring to Ekaterina's notion, saying that actually there should be this duality of understanding of the both sides, and there should be mutual feeling, which reminded me actually what diplomacy is all about, because in diplomatic core you cannot work when you cannot really empathize with the other side, and the only question is what is the technicalities of reaching certain goals which both parts have. So therefore I thought it's because you've written marvelous articles, we will have this discussion here, and I thought that as Andris is provocative, I thought to be provocative as well. So I just will have a futuristic vision, and I just want to see your reaction. So what do you feel about that? So let's say in 2050, there will be no more the power vertical, which is gangster-like ruling Russia today, and there will be a true federation, which will be trying to have a different agreement with the European Union, having a particular Eastern partnership with the China, Japan, and one Korea, hopefully. And at the same time, there will be the true federation, so there will be finally what Yeltsin said, that take sovereignty as much as you want, so there will be sovereign republics on the border on the west of Russia, so meaning the Karelia will be truly Karelia, there will be a new perhaps St. Petersburg or Novgorod Republic, there will be true federal entities which will be having deals with the European countries, and there will be investors coming back to Russia. Is it too futuristic or it's realistic? Thank you very much.
I guess the Veiko's question was, what is a post-Putin's world? But let's take still some additional questions from the audience, please. Ojārs, please.
Thank Ekaterina for being here, because I think this is also a very important part of the dialogue, is to be able to exchange these views. You brought up the metaphor of the chess game, and that we're both playing, but maybe by different rules. Latvia has done well in chess recently. Our finance minister just defeated the world champion. But usually in chess, there's no argument over the rules. It's everyone knows, and it's just, you know, who can outthink the other. The problem that we seem to get, especially after the Crimea and eastern Ukraine, is that there seems to be a desire on Moscow's part to change the rules to something new. Would you agree with that? Because up until now, we've talked about international law setting the rules for relations between states, and that seems to be one of the challenges that we're facing in trying to have a dialogue with Russia. Thank you.
Please, some other questions? Victors? And then we go back to the panelists.
Victor Makaros, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm just wondering, and I'd like to hear the experts' take on this. Sometimes you can talk about disagreements, like we know what we are talking about, we understand lots of things in a similar way, but we disagree on certain issues. In this case, I just wonder if we speak different languages, not literally speaking, but we have completely different reference frameworks. When I talk to some of our Russian colleagues or Russian experts, I feel that in order to start talking about the situation in Ukraine, to start understanding each other's point of view, we simply have to go back in history, like a couple of centuries. Do you think that we still can talk, that we still have the same language to discuss things in, or do we need to construct a language first? Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. And I think this has been quite a fundamental question. And of course, I can just throw additional. I think this is pretty much a overlapping with some of those questions, because sometimes I ask myself, of course, we are engaged in a dialogue, we understand the importance of the dialogue, but we are so different. Ekaterina spoke about the trust, but it's not just trust evaporated overnight. It's actually because we perceive in different way actually our own domestic developments as well. We build completely different our legitimacy. Our political orders are different. Our value systems are increasingly, it seems, to start to diverge as well. So if you are different value communities, can we actually build the trust? Because we perceive the world differently. And I think it echoes with some of the questions here from the audience. And of course, Ekaterina, we would be very happy to have your insights, but Reinhard and Bruno and Imants, of course, also yours as well. Ekaterina, if you may start and we can proceed.
Thank you very much. So I think that I have three questions. The first one about duality and diplomacy. Yes, you're absolutely right, I think, but just look at the discourse in our media of our high officials. It will be, if you just translate it in one language, you will look absolutely the same arguments, but blaming each other. And I think it is a problem, and we have to do something with it. Well, about the rules and the changing the rules. Unfortunately, it's also a question for me now, and I think it's high time to investigate who is changing the rules, and perhaps we do have to change the rules because they don't deal with the current situation. And speaking about Crimea, speaking about Donbass, we also can recall Kosovo, and we also what was there, what rules were used to in those cases. It's a question. And can we build trust? Yes, of course. And I think that you should look at Russian society more detailed. The society is absolutely different. We have various points of view. There is not only one point of view in Russia. Not most of our people look only official TV channels. That's why we do have some European values, as well as some Eurasian values in Siberia and so on, if we just can call them Eurasian values. And I think, yes, we can build a trust and we can find some common language, but I absolutely agree with you that there should be this common language for dialogue.
Yeah, Reinhard, please.
Yeah, even though the questions were not directed towards me, I would like to comment. I think we have to be clear about the cause of the problem we have right now. And you heard this many times, but we cannot go away from it. Russia's understanding is that the 90s were a nightmare for them in general. Yes, there are people we know, we like, friends in Russia who say, no, they were fantastic. I agree, I lived in that time there, and in general, one could argue this way. But the development, the changes didn't come along with prosperity. I mean, I think this is clear. And nobody could assume or could have assumed that a country ruled by that kind of elite was able to overcome the difficulties within a couple of years. Absolutely impossible. And Mr. Putin would have failed the same as Mr. Yeltsin. But this is the cause. Russia feels the 90s have not improved the status of the country. The security, according to them, is not as it should be, and then so on and so forth. You know all the arguments. But this is the cause, the real cause, and we know it. The question is, how do we deal with them? Do we say, oops, we made a mistake, and now let's do this, redo this, or I don't know. can't do this. The situation we have, and we are very happy with it because we thought the division of Europe is gone. And it is gone. The problem is we have a new division. And that is not only towards Russia, but this is all to the countries of the Eastern Partnership, partly at least. And how do we deal with this? So if you say different language, I think it's a different perception. And this is why, and this goes for everybody who is dealing with Russian experts or politicians, yes, they start way back, possibly Peter the Great, possibly the time when the Poles were ruling the country, and so on and so forth. This is going on. I think what we have to understand, this was another question concerning Russia in 2050. The population, and even Levada is saying this, is divided. On the one hand side, there is support for the foreign policy at the moment, at least. And you can argue this is propaganda or not, but it's there. On the other hand side, criticism towards the social status quo in Russia is huge. The criticism towards the financial and economic development is huge. Nobody's satisfied with that. Russia is not where it should be according to the Russian population. But it is divided in terms of foreign policy. And this is a huge difference if we look at the last population of the Soviet Union, and this has been done by research. The last generation of the Soviet Union, I mean the last in terms of they were young when the Soviet Union imploded, were extremely cynical with the Soviet Union in every aspect. That's why the Soviet Union went down with a poof, just like that, because nobody was believing in it. This is different. So to assume that in 2050 or 2030 or 40, whatever, after 2024, it should be then, when the second possibly reigning of Mr. Putin will come to an end, it will change towards that. I have very little belief that this will happen because of what I just said. The population is going for a coming back of Russia as a power to be reckoned with. This doesn't give me, as a Russian, any surplus in my account. Not for my children. I'll send them to England or to Latvia or wherever. But I'm still believing, in general, this is a good thing. This is schizophrenic, of course, and it's difficult to deal with. But as long as we understand the real cause, and you said this, there must be possibly a new agreement, the NATO-Russia Council, or a new Helsinki process. I'm very doubtful, because I think what we have right now is the best we can get for the longest time. And the question is, and here the dialogue is difficult, what does Russia want except having more to say in European security? How? And so far, I haven't heard anything new on a new Helsinki Plus. I know that Russia and the RIAC has done a study on that, that there are talks about it, but this would mean we all sit around the table, the politicians who are responsible, and we solve it. Won't happen. Because what Russia wants at the moment, so it seems, is something which, for example, NATO member states and also EU member states, for most of them, are not willing to do. That's what I meant with multilateralism, which we cherish in NATO and also in the EU. And Russia is not going towards that. But if you said, and this is the last one, I'm sorry, you said dialogue is not a policy. Of course it's not. It's an instrument. And here I think we should be clear, where do we want to go? What's the vision? Do we want a common security room, including Russia? If so, then we have to do something about it. At the moment, it seems to be completely impossible, but as somebody has said, Russia is not going away. And the final point is, if you look back in history, and I don't want to go too far back, something which I kind of remember, when the Berlin Wall was built to start a dialogue with Russia, with the Soviet Union, even though in '68 tanks moved into Prague, even though in 1980-81 the Warsaw Pact was handling, so to speak, the initiative of Poland, this was all very, very difficult to digest. But still, we continued because there was an idea where to go to. And we had the final Helsinki Act. There's nothing today like that. And I think we have to look towards this, even though Russia seems to be such a difficult country or government at the moment, but that won't change.
Thank you, Reinhard. Bruno, you had a short comment as well.
Just very briefly on this point about language, I think that's very important what you're raising there. Look, in my eyes, I think that Mr. Putin and his club of henchmen are very good at language. I think perhaps the problem is more on our side. When I hear our European politicians talking about de-escalation, ramp-off strategies, if I would be Mr. Putin in the Kremlin, that's just basically giving me a green light to go into Ukraine, to go into Georgia. Take a word like adversary. I cannot even name one document of the EU or NATO where the word adversary is used. What, does that mean we don't have any? Of course we have. So I think we need to be a bit more clear in our own language. That will allow us to perhaps create more clear goals, more clear policy, and perhaps be able to talk a bit better with our big neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruno. Imants, your yes and no answer?
Given that you would like me to expand a little bit, I'm happy to say something more than just a yes-no answer. On the last point of Bruno about adversary, it's interesting when Ash Carter was in the UK last week, he actually said that we don't seek an enemy in Russia. And I mean, I think this is part of the dialogue issue, you know, and the type of language that we need to use, and I think it's important, but at the same time, and again, this is the balance of engagement and deterrence, he then goes on to say, we will defend our allies, make no mistake about that. So, you know, you do have this dual approach, which Ian Kearns, I think, once when he was in Riga, mentioned being able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I think you know there's no problem with that. Again, on Victor's point about the language, I think we need to go back and I'd agree that it's more a question of building trust, which is, you know, these are the concepts that certainly the European Leadership Network, the Nuclear Threat Initiative are very engaged in, and I think it's very important to address that without necessarily abandoning sort of values that are very dear to us. Bruno mentioned in his intervention that that he feels that Europe, whole and free, can only be with Russia on board. Well, I mean, I think we made a lot of efforts post 1991 to keep Russia on board. You know, we went overboard to sort of engage with Russia with the Founding Act and all the other things. But unfortunately, I think it's right what Reinhard's mentioned. I mean, essentially, it's not that Russia today wants to have a say in European security. Russia always wants to have a say in, you know, this was the position during the post-Cold War period where, without being a member of NATO or the European Union, Russia wanted to actually be at the table and have a say in the decision-making process. This was the whole debate within NATO about the Russia-NATO Council. Is it NATO and Russia, or is it the two together having a dialogue? Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it was the NATO countries agreeing on their position beforehand and then going into a discussion with Russia. Because otherwise, you know, Russia's aim was to have an influence and a say without being a member, without having to go through all of the requirements of membership, which, you know, all of our countries went through. They were very difficult, challenging, but we achieved them. And those are the rules of the game, which at the moment, you know, I would disagree that we need to change the rules of the game. They've been very well defined. They have been breached in a very big way by our Russian counterparts, you know, because of the annexation and military intervention in Ukraine and the action they took before in Georgia to a certain extent. So there. Thank you.
Thank you, Imants. So another round of questions. Yes. Yes, please, of course. Please. I think we had a round of basically officials, so it would be good to have also the round of civil society or NGO sector, please. Or the young students, excellent. Please.
Hello, Nikita Lumi at Tartu University, Estonia. As we saw in case of Crimea, in case of Georgia, in this crisis, the very important issue was the national minorities and their rights in these regions. And for Russia, it was one of the reasons to participate in these conflicts, even sometimes with military means. So, if we want to build some bridges, if we want to make cooperation and so on, don't you think that this kind of disagreement of national minorities with national policies can be the block in these processes of building the bridges? And if you think if this is the important point of this problem, what can we do to succeed in that? Thank you.
Okay, I think very important question, and Imants, I think, touched upon this in his article as well. Please, yes.
Sorry, is this working?
Yep.
Yes. Daniel von Wiche, Center for European and Transitional Studies, University of Latvia. It was mentioned with the Vienna Congress, was recently 200 years of that anniversary, and also what Bruno was talking about with redefining the rules, reworking the rules for a post-1990s environment. Do you feel that a similar congress or conference, obviously suitable for 21st century values and customs, would be needed to basically rewrite the rules so that to decrease conflict with Russia and to perhaps even make them feel more included in this obviously changed 21st century reality?
Thank you. So, some other questions? Yes, please. Very good.
Zümrüt Paşayeva, Tartu University. 2014, Russian Foreign Ministry made a statement about that Russia sees a necessity on protection of human rights of Russian minority in Baltic states. It does mean that violence of human rights of Russian speakers in this region.
Human rights, that's what Russia claims, I understand, yeah. Okay, yep. So I think it's pretty much connected to the first one. So please, some other, I think there is a chance for the last one, because then we'll have a final round. So, is there some other questions, comments? If not, we can come back to the panelists, but I would throw my own question sort of as a last one as well, because we debated already that how to proceed. We speak about Riga Dialogue. We speak about the dialogue is not a replacement for a policy, and we need concrete steps. What would be, from your side, the most concrete steps? What should be done to engage in a sort of productive dialogue, especially between those election periods? So 2018 we have elections, presidential elections in Russia, of course 2017 in Germany and France as well. So next 2 years, what should be concretely done in terms of trying to improve the situation? But we come back to Imants, also on this triangle of national and minority, nationalizing state, kin state, how this love triangle look like, but also, of course, on more this wider perspective on Vienna Congress, multipolarity, and concrete steps, what could be done. Let's do it in reverse order. Imants, you are the floor first.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think I'll deal with the first question and the last one in particular, because you know, these are the type of issues that I mentioned in my contribution in the book, and as I mentioned in my intervention, I think, you know, what you mentioned, the way you phrased your question in some ways, I would describe that as delusional in some ways, the sort of the way in which there is a description that comes from Moscow about the gross violation of human rights of minorities in the Baltic states. Well, I mean, that's pretty nonsensical, essentially, because, you know, we, as members of the European Union and all of the other organizations which deal with these issues, such as the Council of Europe, the OSCE, the United Nations, we have addressed these issues in a very open and upfront manner. We've taken on board all of the advice of these organizations, and we're still very open to a dialogue about these important issues. They are important issues, within Latvian society. I accept that that's the case. We've just had a visit of the Human Rights Commissioner Niels Muižnieks to Latvia, who, again, addressed one of the aspects of the challenges within society, that we should give automatic citizenship to children that are born in Latvia, which we don't do at the moment. We opt not automatic citizenship to those children that are born in Latvia of non-Latvian. As far as I'm aware, I think the parents have to opt for whether they can, but I could be mistaken. Our legislators probably know better than I do about that. So I would say that these are, this is something where we're talking, it's a deception that comes out of Russia, and it's a sort of deception that was used and an excuse in the case of Ukraine and Crimea, that there were abuses of the minorities, the Russian minorities were being abused or were mistreated in Ukraine. That was a pretext, what I would say is a pretext for military intervention and all that went with it. It was part of the hybrid war, as well as sending in little green men without uniforms and no, they're not Russian soldiers. The whole scenario. But the question whether this disagreement, as you say, on national minorities blocks building bridges, I don't think it does. I mean, I think, we have to stand firm in our positions and, just as there is a strong policy from Moscow making these false allegations, it's also the case that there are some political forces in Latvia who like to say, look, and use the other argument that no, we'll never let these occupants, have become citizens of Latvia, which is so. There's a certain amount of comfort between the two extremes that encourages this type of diversity or extremity of views. And I think the policy of consecutive Latvian governments has always been pragmatic and to have an exchange and to come to agreement on these issues, and certainly from the government's point of view, always to stick to the legal accepted norms of all of the European institutions, which we're very proud to. And we, in fact, in many ways, go further than what is required with, say, state support for 7 minority languages within Latvia. I think you'd find very few countries within the European Union where the state actually finances the teaching of in school in 7 minority languages.
Yes, even though, of course, I think this is a very wide subject, and I think we cannot deny that there are some challenges and issues in this regard, and we see it every year. Also, the different narratives, different collective memory expressions in terms of the history, and I think we've seen it even sometimes on the streets as well. So that's why, of course, there are still some issues and questions to deal with. 9th of May, I think, is one of the controversial days in Latvian history, and we have completely 2 different narratives on this, I think, in 2 communities. And we cannot completely deny that one as well. And I think, of course, this is still, I believe, in a sense of a vulnerability, even though there have been steps done in many ways. But I guess we are not here to discuss among ourselves, to go too much into depth in this issue, but I think it is another mindset that there are steps to make, and I think those questions from the audience also reveals that, well, let's not put it under the carpet as well. Bruno, please.
Yeah, very short. I'll take your question and your question together. First of all, Russia is included in the international community. They're part of the UN Security Council. They are in the OSCE. There's a NATO-Russia Council. So I don't understand, this rhetoric is coming from Moscow that they feel excluded. The only thing they could hold against us is that we kicked them out of the G8, but there were obvious reasons for that. So Russia is part of the system. So I'm not saying that we need to throw away the architecture that was created in the 90s. Not saying that, not without having something else in place. I'm also not saying that if we come up with new rules, if we come up with a new concept, that we should give up on our values and our norms. Absolutely not. So what these new rules could be, what the new concept could be, look, I don't know. This is a very difficult question. But what I do know is that the first step worth exploring, especially for this part of Europe, is to really work on this risk reduction. As I said, the current military trends are very worrying, and we need to eliminate this, the fact that we can no longer manage risk. That would be the first step. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Ekaterina?
Some points very shortly. I think that we also, speaking about dialogue and building bridges, we should not forget about the fact that there are some actors on both sides who benefit from the conflict. And it is very important to remember about it.
Who are they?
Well, it's a question of investigation, I think. Speaking about ethnic minorities and ethnical question, well, ethnicity, it is also a concept. It's a concept which helps us to deal with the reality of differences, cultural, linguistic, religious, and so on and so forth. And please remember that we can construct ethnicity, we can construct nationality. And, well, if we take the Ukrainian case, in the eastern Ukraine, this identity is now being constructed, only being constructed. Well, to prevent ethnic minorities from destructive way, I think that it is very important to build mutual respect of different ethnic minorities and to try to live in multicultural society. As I think in Latvia you are rather successful in such things. Thank you.
Good to know. Reinhard?
Yeah, one approach of combining deterrence and détente is congagement. This is a word which was coined by the Rand Corporation in terms of cooperation or congagement between the United States and China at the end of the 1990s. The German Institute has tried to adapt this to the EU relationship between Russia. But again, this is only the instrument. So how much engagement depends on how much engagement there will be, how much containment depends on how much is needed. But again, as I said, this is the instrument. This is not about the topic. This is not where we are heading. And Congress of Powers, that was your question, is certainly not what the European Union wants. As I have said, it's multilateralism. The Congress of Power is a multipolar world, and then you have the big powers, and the rest have kind of a way to fit into this. I don't think this is something which we want, even though if we look at Syria, the United States and Russia are talking. So this is partly, in a small part, exactly that. But the EU doesn't want that, and this is also written in the global strategy of the EU. And this is the result of 60 or 70 years European cooperation after the Second World War. This is what we have achieved. This is why the countries who are in the EU, except Britain now, are very much interested, and why still the EU is a model which still attracts other countries. And this is why Russia at the moment pays a price for that, because they have violated that. I don't want to talk about what other countries have violated in the 90s. So if we just point the finger at Russia, I think this is also partly, it is true, but there have been other violations without any doubt. And I think this is a huge point in Russia, but it doesn't help really, because the question is, where do we want to go? Again, the EU want to have a rule-based international cooperation. In general, Russia wants it too, but only with the slight difference that the rules are partly made by Russia, which are not in favor of other countries. So here we have a huge discrepancy. Ruski mir, the Russian world, many things have been said, but this is a major, I think, challenge for other countries, because this is the connection between domestic policy and foreign policy in Russia. Just because, and Medvedev, I think, was in 2008 after or during the war in Georgia, has pointed out that Russia will do anything to protect Russian minorities worldwide. Now, I don't think that Russia has any ideas, any wishes to go towards the Baltic countries. But this point saying, aha, we have Russian minorities, especially in Estonia and Latvia, so we're not excluding. This is why I think we have the discussion in NATO and in the EU. We have to do something about it. And as long as Russia is not defining what it means by protecting these minorities, this is a serious problem. And if Russia then says, okay, we have a huge human rights problem in Estonia and Latvia, this is going in the same direction. Last point, Andris, you said about concrete steps. I think I said it last time. I think we have to differentiate, not just saying this is our policy towards Russia or towards the East, as a matter of fact, the countries of the Eastern Partnership. I think we should make this clear into short, medium, and long term. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Short term, again, is the Minsk II agreement. This is basically the litmus test. If we are not doing any progress, it is difficult to assume any more dialogue. At the same time, just saying, okay, if this has been solved, then comes the next step, won't work either. That's what I mean with the vision. So what's the long-term vision for a security system and for the cooperation with Russia? And we have to come up with things. Just saying we need this is not good enough. We need something where we want to work at, and this also would exclude a wavering of politics. So if Russia does that, we do this. If Russia does that, we do this. If we have an idea we want to go heading for, this won't happen. But of course, I understand we won't solve this now in Riga. This is a huge problem. But my feeling is sometimes we're trying to avoid that. We're just talking about the Ukraine, we're talking about Georgia, we're talking about Eastern Partnership. We're not talking about where are we heading for and what are our interests and what are we willing to compromise on. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Reinhard, and thank you to the rest of the speakers. I would be short in concluding. I think we live in reality world, and this reality world is quite full of different challenges, be it in a wider Euro-Atlantic community, be it also in our relations with Russia. As last year, Karsten Voigt, and I like his phrase when he said or when he wrote that security as far as necessary, cooperation as far as possible. Of course, we should aspire for some cooperation, but there are certainly some limits, and they were indicated by the panelists here around the table as well, that there are those short-term, I think, quite a skeptical perspective, but at the same time, let's not throw away the long-term hope and expectations that we might sometimes also, through the dialogue, increase trust and some convergence of values and interests in some of the issues. I like the term also actually coined by the my German colleagues, a cooperative confrontation. There is cooperation on accounts where you can cooperate, Syria, terrorism, economy sometimes as well. Nord Stream is an example of it. We didn't discuss in details. It's also it's a difficult or quite a complicated subject. But at the same time, confrontation where it is necessary, where sort of we should stand to our principles and values. The continuous debate is important. Homework is also important, and we touched upon this a little bit, what we do in our own community, in our own, on our own national level. But I think the expectations management is important here. So we are a bit downcast. We should engage, but let's be realistic. We live in reality world as well. But the exercise as such, the network as such, bringing the stakeholders together, I think this is also the value in itself, even though it's a not replacement for policy. Thanks to the speakers, thanks to the authors, thanks to our partners once more for contributing and supporting, and thanks to the audience for coming and in such a large numbers. And I can see the international body of students here as well. So great that that's not just Latvian audiences, but also the international representatives or from international sources are also being joined the event today. So thank you so much and enjoy the coffee.